Welcome to Week 6. One chapter in our primary text, Chapter 13, our author describes how a good understanding of a few good theories enhance the strategic manager's success. And I found this to be true in my own life. When you can apply some theory in a very practical way, it helps lend credibility to your own advice. And it's one of the reasons why we developed this program to be applied theory based. So hopefully you found that to be true in your classes. You will certainly find it to be true in this class. And these theories, sometimes people think of a theory and they have some sort of esoteric thought or some pie in the sky or some ivory tower, whatever analogy you want to use. But essentially a theory is just a generalization about how people think and behave. This theory helps determine the appropriate goals and objectives for a communication program. Rather than just guessing, you have some data upon which you can base your recommendations. And it helps when these theories are scientifically tested, whether it's qualitative or quantitative. You'll learn more about that in the program if you haven't already taken that course. And it helps you develop effective strategies to achieve your organization's goals and objectives. Now, one note, theories cannot guarantee success, but they can improve the probability of success. So they have a role to play, but of course they're not foolproof. Theories often use fancy social science terms. They may have some meaning to scholars who may be looking for specific nuances. But good theories, they usually just boil down to sensible language that's fairly simple to apply. You'll find 4 theories in this chapter starting on page 243. I'll encourage you to read those. I'll let you read those on your own for the sake of brevity. I will note that also on page 257, you'll find a model of the 6 Ps. Now, some of you, especially if you have a marketing background, you may know about the 4 Ps. Product, place, price, and promotion. Your authors introduced 2 more, and those are public and positioning. And you can look at figure 13.6 in your text. Again, on page 257, it talks about those 6 Ps, so I recommend you look at that. I also recommend that you look at the Public Relations Society of America Member Statement of Professional Values on page 254. It's important that we hold ourselves up to the highest ethical standards, especially since we are often seen as the conscience of an organization if you are responsible for public relations. Okay, our first reading, Gruening, General Theory of Public Relations, offering a theoretical framework for public relations. Now, one thing to keep in mind, when you download this chapter, you may find that it's more than 90 pages. That actually includes chapter 2 and 3. So depending upon how your computer downloads the link, don't be alarmed. You're only going to be reading chapter 2. That chapter ends on page 38. I'll offer some highlights like I normally do as part of this video, but also written out in the week as well. And I encourage you to kind of skim through the article, pull out that information that will help inform your research. There's a lot of details in there, and I don't want you to get lost in the details. Pull out what's helpful to you for this course. Maybe you'll find some information in there that will also be helpful to your work in your own organization. Now, I will note one theory, and that's the excellence theory. Keep in mind that this is a general theory, but it begins with a premise about the value of public relations to organizations as well as to society. And it uses this premise of value to integrate a number of middle range theories about the organization of public relations function, the conduct of public relations programs, and the environmental and organizational context of excellent public relations. So that's one theory I will point out for you. Also, as a side note, I've mentioned the Public Relations Society of America several times in this course. There's another organization that's very good. I have not personally been involved in it, but I know other respected professionals who are, and that's the International Association of Business Communicators. In fact, I have a good friend of mine. He actually is very active in both the Public Relations Society of America as well as the International Association of Business Communicators. Okay, Final article this week is Hallahan's 7 Models of Framing, and more specifically, how that framing applies to public relations. Now, some of you, if you have a communication background, you are probably familiar with the term framing. It's a useful paradigm for examining the strategic creation of public relations messages and audience responses. It's based upon a literature review across many disciplines, and this article identifies 7 distinct types of framing applicable to public relations. And one thing to keep in mind is kind of common sense. I think we all know this, but it bears repeating. Defining reality is the essence of communication. That's what we do when we communicate. We are defining some sense of reality. Framing is a critical activity in the construction of that social reality, right? Because it helps shape the perspectives through which people see the world. When you think about building a house, what do you do first? Or one of the first things you do is you frame it, right? Same way with communication. The framing metaphor is better understood as a window, maybe a portrait frame drawn around the formation. And it helps delineate the subject matter and thus focus attention on key elements within the communication that you're providing. Keep in mind that frames are not static characterizations, but they change with time. So this is where the analogy kind of falls apart. If you want to think of a window frame, it obviously is sturdy, but in the context of communication, framing does change over time. The categories of framing that they outline in this chapter, they're not mutually exclusive. They actually work in tandem with one another, combined with one another, interact with one another. And so you'll find more about that framing as you read that in the text. I also encourage you to look at Table 1, which is on page 210 of the article. There, the author provides a typology of 7 models of framing that are applicable to public relations. So for me, it offered a pretty good overall summary for the typology of framing that the authors recommend. And then you'll find on page 224, or actually starting on page 224, some applications. So get a good summary, get the foundation, and then try to read through those applications, because that's where I believe the most helpful part of the article is. How do you apply this for this public relations class, but of course more importantly, how do you apply it in your public relations profession? All right, well, that is it for this week. As always, I'll remind you to stay ahead with all your assignments, stay engaged in the discussion board, and of course, enjoy this time of learning.